Welcome everybody to another episode of Tax Sale Insiders. I am your host again, Brian Seidensticker. I'm CEO of Tax Sale Resources. And with me again, I have Matt Abey and Randy Saunders, both with Nelson Mullins. And you guys have joined us for what was supposed to be a three-part series, but we got into so many good scenarios, we're calling worst case scenarios, that we ended up making a four-part series. We spent the first three parts kind of talking about what some of those issues are, touching on those solutions. And today I want to circle back on those issues, talk really more of like, how do you actually solve, how do you prevent, how do you see these coming with eyes wide open? But anyhow, I guess Matt, Randy, thanks for joining us again.
Yeah, it's nice that the fans demanded an encore. So,
we broke the internet 3 times. We might as well break it one more time.
No, we're happy to be back.
And the information you guys provide has been enormously helpful to me at a minimum. I'm sure to our readers as well. And I've been in the industry for 13 years, and I learn something every day. That's one of the things I do love about the industry, and you guys have been a plethora of good advice and information. But so today's I'll call it theme, right, is kind of bringing it all together, right? Let's recap what we've done. Let's talk about some of the solutions to those scenarios, worst case scenarios we've talked about. And one of the first items that I remember talking about after listening back through that stuff, Randy, is just, it seems basic, but how many investors don't do this, is just coming up with a top level plan. Like, what is your goal? You talked a little bit about that in episode 1, but can you elaborate on that a little bit more?
Yeah, and we always joke, starting out, assuming we don't have a time machine. So, the best strategy when you're looking, especially we get a lot of folks that they've got industry knowledge, they just have industry knowledge in a different state. And while a lot of times the statutory schemes can be similar, and you got tax lien states, you got tax deed states, so how different can it be? Well, it can be a lot different. And the markets you're going to be in are a lot different. The judicial systems you're going to be, a lot different. And so we try to recommend, 2 things. Like anything, you need to do your reconnaissance. And how do you do that? One of the easiest ways is contacting an attorney that is in that state, that actually has boots on the ground, that understands, that can, even if you have to pay out of pocket for an hour conversation or 2-hour conversations, and a lot of times you don't have to do that. But the amount of information you'll gain and the amount of heartache you'll save from having that conversation, to understanding the jurisdiction, to understanding the procedures, and to go into the second part of what I'm going to say. So the first part is talking to an attorney to understand the landscape. The second is making sure that you've taken time to develop what your business strategy to ensure your return on investment is going to be. If I'm going into a state where I want to identify properties that I want to ultimately own, am I looking at what counties do I need to go in? Where's the refill market going to be? How am I going to, pull all this through, so that you basically have a soup to nut strategy, so that when these things that we do talk about come up, you're not already drowning trying to figure out how you're going to make this work. You've already got a plan in place, because there are going to be contingencies that happen along the way. But as long as I'm going to go into, and I always fall back to West Virginia because that's where my office is, but I'm going to go get tax liens. I'm going to hope they don't get redeemed. I'm going to go get a tax deed. And then I am going to, shift those properties into a real estate holding company, and then I'm going to fix them up and I'm going to rent them. I know that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do it in these 12 counties because there's either a lot of industry or there's a college. I'm going to have a rental market, and there's enough of a rental market around college towns that I could package these and resell them. I know everything I'm going to do start to finish, right? And so then when some of these other contingencies come up, that's outside of my plan, I can handle that. I've got the bandwidth to be able to do that. Plus, I've got the attorney contact that I need for those specific occasions where I can go back and say, all right, now this happened to me. What can we do, to fix it?
I'm going to add on to your, it's not just talking to any attorney, right? It's talking to an attorney that is in the industry, in the space, working with it on a regular basis. If you look up, just a regular real estate attorney, may or may not know what they're doing, but asking how often they deal with tax sale cases is a perfect first question. If the answer is, well, not a whole lot, you're going to pay them a lot more, and they're not going to have that inside knowledge like I guess plugging you guys, but Nelson Mullins, this is what you guys do, right? And in several states, right? So you guys are going to have an immense more of knowledge right at the forefront of your conversation than just an attorney that may be in real estate but not as familiar with the tax sale space.
And we have people that call us a lot and ask us about certain states. And, we like to think that, look, we have 31 offices across the United States, but there are some states that I have friends that practice that, for instance, Indiana is one, we don't have a specific presence there. So, you may have somebody that's interested in Indiana, we would refer them. So even people that have questions, even if it's somewhere that we couldn't offer assistance, we could probably help refer you to someone in that state, or even if it's you want the southern part of a state in that jurisdiction that could, provide you with beneficial kind of oversight, as opposed to what you're saying, just somebody that's going to look up the statute 5 minutes before the call and try to figure out what's going on.
Right. And there's we'll keep it simple, right? There's a lot that goes into, I'll say, creating that top level plan or investment model. And we get asked, Tax Resources gets asked all the time, where do I get the best return? It's a loaded question. It highly depends on what your model is, and to really boil a lot of factors that can go into creating a model. We'll keep it simple with simple. Do you want real estate, or are you just looking for an interest return, right? And try to, without getting too complicated, we'll keep it at that. And even within a state, and I guess you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, even within a state, there's going to be some counties where more will redeem versus other, right? So if you're targeting real estate, just because a state's statutes are better geared toward getting a return, there may be some areas where the redemption rate is a lot lower, and that's where you need to target. And I guess one of the things that we do is provide those sale results. That seems to be an elusive piece of the puzzle in this industry, is without actually going to an auction and placing money and just seeing how it goes. That's been how people found that information out in the past. You can actually come to us and access those sale results, put your model, or apply your model and see what your return would have been last year. Right. Doesn't mean it's definitely going to be that way this year, but things don't change a whole lot in this industry from one year to the next.
And Brian, if I can jump in, right, because I think one of the great examples that we've talked a little bit about is, because one, sometimes you have a plethora of data, but you don't necessarily know how to utilize it, or you don't know where to get the data. Mm-hmm. So, kind of putting what we do and what you do together. For instance, if you're going to go into a state and you want to get redemptions, the information that you guys provide that's there, that's easy to get is, well, let's find out if these are secured by a mortgage or a deed of trust. Why is that important? Because if these are secured by a financial institution, they're going to show up at some point and they're going to redeem, especially because the vast majority of these residential loans require an escrow account, right? Mm-hmm. And it's going to require the payment of taxes. That's going to be an obligation that the loan servicer has. So they're not going to miss a chance to redeem. So if your return on investment is going to be contingent upon redemptions, and that's kind of like you're in a state where you're servicing and you want that, that's one of the first pieces of information you should be looking up. If you're in a state where you want the property and you don't want it to redeem, one of the first things we would say is go look at that information. This is your business plan. When we're looking at it, it doesn't mean all of them have to be properties that aren't secured by mortgages, but or deeds of trust. But if you can find those properties, the properties that you want, and you see that they're free and clear, it's much more likely that you're going to not get a redemption, because obviously the folks that have that property are having some kind of difficulty paying the taxes, and you don't have a third party that's going to show up to save the day because there's no obligation to do it. But understanding how to utilize that information that's available to help in your business model, and understanding how the state works, that's when people ask, where do you get the best return on investment? It's where you employ the best strategy and where you stick to it. That's where you get the best return on investment.
Exactly. Not so to get back to let's say the highly simplified model of, I'm either pursuing real estate or I'm pursuing that interest return on my investment. Just running through the states you guys are familiar with, and I know maybe not every county, but in general, maybe we'll start with Kentucky. Randy, is Kentucky a good state to own real estate, or a good state to earn a return on your investment?
Yeah, so Kentucky's going to require you to hold it for a year to try to get a payment plan in place. Then you're going to have to service these. Ultimately, you're going to have to file a judicial action that's going to take it to a sale, and the sale produces the funds that you're going to receive at the end. So it doesn't mean you can't show up and bid and stuff, but it's not what I would say. If somebody was looking to acquire real estate, I wouldn't recommend Kentucky. I would say that's a state where you want a larger portfolio that you're going to be trying to make your money off of the servicing, the interest, and the redemption.
And how about West Virginia?
West Virginia would be, I think in my mind, the exact opposite. I think you're going to have a strategic plan where you're going to buy. There's 55 counties statewide. I wouldn't even recommend, maybe at most, purchasing in a third of those, because you're going to want to look for a secondary market, either rental or purchase. You can have a significant number that will redeem, but I think it's much easier because essentially after 18 months, you walk into the county clerk's office and you get a tax deed. And then the property is yours. Now there's 3 years to challenge, but if you're going to hold and rent it, it doesn't really matter. And as long as you have an attorney do the notice on the front end, you should be fine. So again, there it is it's a little bit of a hybrid, because again, you're purchasing in a select number of counties to make sure that you're going, when the assets you acquire, you're either going to need to rent them, so you got to have a rental population, or you need to sell them.
That's a perfect example of you speak to your friendly attorney, Randy Saunders in West Virginia, that along with data, you can target those few states, right? It's not going to be every state, or not state, counties, right? Those few counties that you mentioned, you would know those off the top of your head. Yep. Okay, you're targeting real estate. Here's those few counties that are best to target, right? That's exactly where it's highly beneficial to not just try to learn it yourself. Even if you got to spend an hour or two of that attorney's time, that'll be well worth its weight in gold many, many times over, I'm sure. All right, I guess, Randy, moving on to some of the states that you practice in, I guess South Carolina, would you consider that a good state for a return or real estate?
Yeah, so usually in South Carolina, people are going after the real estate. The tax sale, it's all county based noticing. So the county is sending that due diligence out for you, and so you're not having to do a lot. And so then once you finally get the tax deed, you're looking at having the property, renting it out, fixing it up, flipping it, that kind of thing. The return is out there, and it's certainly out there in certain counties that are going to redeem more than others. But it does seem to me like the majority of the folks in South Carolina are looking to own the properties, because you get that tax deed, and then you can hold the property and have ownership of it without necessarily filing the quiet title. But if you're looking, so you would do that if you're just renting the property and you're not really worried about a lien holder coming in. But if you're wanting to flip it, then you would do the quiet title, and it's not really a terribly complicated process. So people feel pretty comfortable once they get the property.
How about Alabama?
Well, it depends on what county you're in, and the reason I say that is not because of what we've been talking about how the rate of redemptions and things like that, but there are two different types of two different types of tax sale procedures in the state. So in the old tax sale procedure, you would want the property just because you can get as a part of your redemption cost, you can get preservation improvements back. So any improvements that you make to the house, so that incentivizes you to fix it up and then have that kind of safety net. Under the new tax lien statute, though, you don't have the same kind of incentive to do that. So it really is going to depend on what county and what method they use.
So it's another prime example of, it's not state specific, it's county specific, really not data driven, right? It's as much as process driven. I guess you could find that out by calling each county and asking a question. I will tell you from our experience at TSR, and I tell every employee, because we have a team of folks, their entire job is to call counties, and simple job is just to get the county list, the auction list, right? Don't take the first person you talk to at the county as their word is it's definitely that. You almost need to talk to 2 or 3 separate people, see if it's a consistent answer, and then you can say, okay, that's the right way. More often than not, you talk to 3 people, you're going to get 2 answers one way and 1 answer another way, and then you still got to call back and ask a very, very specific questions to somebody that knows what they're talking about, and you eventually get the answer. I can think of just single bidder rules in Florida is something that we battle with every year. And for some reason, it's not as straightforward as we like to think it is. And counties will give us one answer when we call and another answer. So long story short, you can bypass a lot of that headache, again, by just talking to an attorney that knows what they're doing, right? Matt, you're a perfect example of that in Alabama.
There's been plenty in Alabama over the last, like, I don't know, 5-6 years. You've had to keep your head on a swivel because it has been, I mean, there's been a lot going. I mean, and I'm sure folks that are watching this that have been active in Alabama know exactly what I'm talking about. But it's, I mean, there have been a lot of changes and a lot of uncertainty. So that's a extreme example. But you know, in Alabama, I think you definitely want to make sure you find somebody that can help you navigate that, because the amount of changes and the amount of uncertainty, it's probably been one of the most, I'll just say, active states that we've been dealing with.
Yeah, guys, Matt, you've been in deep in a couple of states that are most active with some random curveballs. You know, South Carolina's another one, right? Alabama's one. I guess not. You know, another one that seemed to have changed several times in the last decade is Louisiana, and it's one of those. The industry really didn't change for 50, 100 years a whole lot, right? Until now it's becoming more popular. In the last 5 to 10 years, there's been more that's changed in that short time period than probably the previous entire history of the tax law industry. And actually brings up a good point of continuing to be educated, right? You know, CLE, you know, in some industries, the tax law industry doesn't really have that, but it's still a critical piece of maintaining that positive in the black margin, you know, on a yearly basis, because stuff can change so quickly, and ways to do that, again, making sure you've got relationships with attorneys that know what they're doing. You guys are at the forefront of all of that communication when new case law comes out and stuff like that. I guess, do you have a couple examples of when case law has totally shifted recently, case law that has totally shifted how something operates in a state?
Yeah, we do. In fact, I think we just had an opinion come out from the Alabama Court of Appeals on Friday. They released their opinions on Friday. And so tax lien nerds like Randy and me have alerts set up, and they'll, you know, if the word tax sale or tax deed or certain statutes are mentioned, it sends us an alert, and we, you know, we're like huddled around the phone reading it really quick and trying to make sure that we can properly advise clients. But it just, the opinion came out on Friday, and it changed how courts are supposed to look at the value of preservation improvements and what that means. And that can really change how you negotiate a redemption with somebody, and the value that you're going to put on work that you've done on a property already. And if you're not paying attention and that case comes out, and then next thing you know, you've just ignored it, and you've given away thousands of dollars worth of amounts that would be a redemption expense under this new case, where you're going to be kicking yourself when 6 months down the road you finally get around to reading some sort of blog post or listening to the podcast here and figure out, wait, I should have gone back and read that. So that goes back to, you know, talking with somebody on the front end and getting your idea about the state and have your exit strategy in place. That's an ongoing relationship that you have. It's not just a one phone call, but having the relationship with that attorney so that they pick up the phone and they say, hey, by the way, this new case came out. You might want to work this into your business model, or work this in so that you're aware of these changes. And there are there's some organizations out there that you can join that will monitor things, not only those judicial changes, but some of the statutory changes. So the National Tax Lien Association, for example, has a group that'll monitor those kind of changes. And then there are attorneys within that group that'll monitor. For example, I think it was 2020, the South Carolina General Assembly just decided they were going to extend the redemption period on tax sales by a year, and they passed a bill. And then that got challenged by the industry, and the court ended up setting that aside as unconstitutional. But those new developments are things that you need to know about, because they're going to really impact your margins and what kind of return that you can get.
And you mentioned the NTLA, and I'm a huge proponent of the National Tax Lien Association as well. And that's one of the best things that they do is is the legislative monitoring in each state to figure out what kind of bills. I mean, the NTLA is not as large as some of the organizations out there associated with real estate, and being able to have lobbyists on the front end trying to tell legislators, here's what you should do. It's much more in a reactive mode, out of necessity. It's, the budget isn't there to have all the lobbyists in place, but it does a great job, or as best a job as I think you can do in monitoring that on a nationwide scale. And they have individuals, I'm sure you guys are on board with a couple of states and monitoring those bills, seeing which ones actually might affect the investors and making them aware, providing opinions. And TLA does a great job. And attorneys, as you talked about, having those relationships is the only better thing that I can think of in each state. And I'd say, tier 3, which is still something. The only, I'll say, newsletter that I'm aware of in the industry that goes out, we actually put out every other week. If it's gotten to the point where it's made a headline, we try to at least pick it up and make it known to the industry. We don't really make a decision on an opinion. We don't write any articles. We're simply just getting the information out there. But being plugged into that newsletter is another way of at least being aware when these things come out. Sometimes they don't mean much, right? And sometimes they're a very big deal. The South Carolina one was a big deal. The changes in Alabama was a huge deal. I guess the other one that came up in Alabama was the whole, if it wasn't on the courthouse steps, right? That was another fun one. It was avoided sale. That created a lot of panic because they haven't had sales and literally on the courthouse steps for some time, right? And all that stuff is good to know that ahead of time. So, all right. And I guess of the other states you guys are involved in, are there any other, we'll say, real estate, wanting to own the real estate focused areas in any states that we haven't talked about already that you guys are aware of or practice in?
But like I mentioned, Alabama, if you're under the old tax sale statute, that's a good one where you're wanting to own real estate. But it made me think, if that's going to be the exit strategy, that's something that you have to plan also how you're going to accomplish that exit strategy, right? So in Alabama, for example, you need to know you've got a contractor lined up to be able to do those preservation improvements. You've got a real estate broker, an agent that's ready to put them on the market. You've got somebody ready to quiet the title or whatever the case might be to do the closing, something like that. So you take those states and you talk about planning and getting ready. It's more than just knowing that I want my exit strategy to be owning the real estate in somewhere like Alabama we talk about, or South Carolina. But then what do I need to do to accomplish that? And who do I need to have lined up that I'm not just going to spend a couple months after I get the tax deed to wait and figure out what we're going to do with it, because that's just going to continue to cut in to the return that you're getting every minute you waste because you didn't line that up ahead of time.
And Brian, one of the things that you mentioned too, you're talking about kind of having that the resources. So for instance, like if you call, Matt and I pick up because we know each other. We've dealt with this stuff, and we've got other clients, that they know they can call us if something comes up, or if we see something, we may call you and say, hey, did you just see this come through? Or we want to draft a little something, or you may call us and say, hey, did you? But if you're not tied in and you're not seeing that information, to your point, you have to be intentional about it. Mm-hmm. Because if you're not, it's not like this stuff is going to make the front page. I like to think what we do is very cool, but my wife reminds me all the time, it's not. And so it's not going to be on the front page of the New York Times. So unless you're tied in, unless you're, going to tax sale resources, unless you're calling us and talking, you may miss some of this stuff, and it may be hard to find. But it's like there is a network out here where we're all tied in together. We're all talking about it, but you need to be intentional in doing that. And the other thing I think is that as you see the way the economy is trending right now, and you see with inflation on the rise, and you see a lot of folks, gas prices, all these other things, it makes those margins a lot tighter, which means in the coming years, there's probably going to be a surplus of inventory at these sales compared to the previous years, which can do one of two things. It'll increase opportunity if you're ready, but it's also going to increase competition. So that's another thing you want to talk about, with your, especially the new people that are just jumping in. Some of them may have no idea what they're doing. I think you're going to see a lot more interest, coming at this year, because we've got, in West Virginia, for instance, October, November tax sales coming up. This year and next year, I think you're going to see a lot more activity in all the states, quite frankly.
Absolutely.
But
Absolutely.
if you've done what you need to do, are you talking to you guys? Are you talking to us? Are you making sure that you're in a position to take advantage of it?
Exactly. I want to, I guess, build on a little bit of what you mentioned, Matt. In Alabama, some counties following one set of rules, which is a little nicer for real estate. Another, other counties following the new set of rules, which isn't as geared toward owning that real estate. And I guess even if you pick the counties, right, is you also got to be pretty smart on which liens you're targeting, right? And that's where the data comes in. And one of the things that we do have, which is unique, is the past sale results and redemption data, right? And you may say, hey, I want to target grade A, single family homes in this county, which uses the old rules, so I should end up with owning real estate. Well, you also picked the segment that is most likely to redeem, right? So it's not a home run on every shot. So it's not just knowing which counties, it's not just knowing which states, it's also being able to look at that data and see what does your model actually meet that. And if not, it's a whole lot easier to pay for a few results, plug your model in, get that answer, move on, right? Or make a decision to modify your model a little bit. I guess those are all things that you have the opportunity to do. Okay, to get off the model topic a bit and kind of hit on some of the other worst case scenarios. One of the items that we spent some time on, I learned a whole lot, I can tell you that, is in mobile homes. And really came down to knowing whether that mobile home is affixed to the property or not. And you said it best, Randy, in the episode. Was like, well, you don't have a time machine. You can't go back and put the mobile home back on the property that you already ripped off. You can't do any of that stuff. So what can be done without having a time machine? And before you make any of those bad decisions, like what can be done before the auction? Can anything be done before the auction, from your opinion?
Matt, do you want to take this to start off, and then I'll jump in?
Yeah, absolutely. It can be something as simple as when you're pulling the data as a property you want to target, just running that same name through the county's tax records and seeing if something else pops up as another taxable item. So you might be able to distinguish between real and personal property just by doing it that way. I believe it's going to be cost prohibitive to do some sort of big DMV search or something like that. We're not suggesting doing that, but just checking it on the website, you might see it might be the exact same tax map number, but with MH after it, or just listed under personal property instead of real property. And so they're not foolproof, but they're a way that you might be able to identify that there's a mobile home on it. And if the county's treating it separately, you need to factor that in as potentially getting just the land and not the mobile home on.
And it can be difficult too, because a lot of times what we see is that these are family plots. And so you've got almost like a compound situation where you might have where mom and dad are, and then sister, and then brother. And so sometimes all the parcels could be in mom and dad's name, but the actual mobile home could be in the owner's name and financed through, so you would have a, Randy Jr. is, got the mobile home that's sitting on Randy Sr.'s piece of property. And so the tax ticket is for unpaid taxes for Randy Sr. So some of that confusion and stuff can cause, and really you're just going to be able to, through research, and there's two components of it too. Obviously you can do due diligence on the front end before purchase, but then obviously before you take any action, once you know what you have, you may want to dig in at that point for sure and do a little bit more due diligence to figure out exactly what's there and who has what.
Yeah, and I think listeners may or may not be going, crap, I got this sale of 2,000 properties and you're wanting me to look up every single property twice, right? Manually. That takes X hours, a lot of hours. Mm-hmm. And one of the ways that you can help, truncate that or expedite that process is again through the data that is available, whether through I'll plug TSR mainly because to my knowledge are the only real nationwide data providers out there but just getting a data file in general on that auction list. And sometimes the county is friendly enough to provide some information. Other times, like Florida provides a lot of information. We try to provide every, like there's 130 different data points on every property. So we provide a lot, because we're not just going to the county. We're relying on third party, title houses, pulling that data in. And a simple information of property use code, property, we standardize that. It can be a standardized land use description, and just knowing what is coming up as a mobile home or not, at least will tell you, hey, this is something that maybe I need to look into more or not. And in most cases, it's not entirely bulletproof, but in most cases, it also provides whether it's a land value and improved value, right? And if you see that it's only improved in $0 for land, that's a pretty good indicator that's just the mobile home. Or if it's all in the land, none in improvement, okay, you're only buying that piece of land. If you happen to see both, okay, chances are that mobile home is a fix. And the other part that comes into that is doing the actual inspections. And it seems something simple, and most real estate guys are targeting real estate will probably be going, well, duh, right? I wouldn't buy any real estate without knowing what I'm getting. But on the lien side, that's kind of new for a lot of guys that are used to buying mortgages. Like, they don't typically think of it from a real estate perspective, but having somebody go buy the property, if it's not you, a local realtor, there's lots of services out there. You can order, again, there's different ways you can get it. Many of them out there. One of them is you can order it through us. We don't do it, but having somebody just drive by the property, take some pictures. Like you said, does that indicate, is there an actual mobile home on that property? Is there multiple mobile homes on that family plot? Is it truly vacant? Knowing that information is highly valuable in either saying, hey, this is something I do want to target, or B, it's not something I want to target, or C, at least I want to look into it in more detail and spend that time doing that double search, as you mentioned, Randy.
And the only way you can avoid it at the end of the day, yes, it may be a little bit more expensive, but, again, there's a lot of liability. And we talked about that. We talked about, for the trash out cases, we talked about the fact that if it's a newer mobile home, it's probably going to be secured, right? But yes, so the only way you can actually develop an action plan is to do the due diligence to understand what you have. And then it's easy. Once you know what you have, you can formulate the action plan. And it's just like, hey, yep, we've got this mobile home. We just found out it's secured by financing. Then send it off to them and say, hey, you guys need to redeem this. It might not be what you wanted. It might not be the perfect plan, but you're going to get some return on investment, and you're not going to create a situation where you've got, significant liability.
Exactly. Well, I'm sure we could talk for hours on this stuff. Actually, I know we could talk for hours on this stuff. I think we covered a lot of the very critical items today, Randy, Matt, and just to kind of recap, the best thing you can do, at least, and you guys correct me if you disagree, the best thing you do is just having a plan going into it, not reacting to each situation and willy-nilly buying liens. That pulls you in a lot of different directions, result in situations maybe you didn't want to be in. So just having a top level plan, and then backing that up with conversations with knowledgeable attorneys in each state, like yourselves. If it's not a state that Nelson Mullins is in, you can reach out to real estate attorneys, ask them how often they deal with tax sale law, and if they are doing it on a regular basis, okay, it's somebody we're talking. If they say they haven't dealt with it in a while, or they don't deal with it very often, keep calling until you find somebody. You'll get more information out of 30 minutes from somebody that knows what they're doing than you ever would in spending thousands of dollars, paying an attorney to learn it from scratch. Having a plan, backing that up with talking to knowledgeable local attorneys, and then keeping plugged in, with that local attorney, or with the National Tax Lien Association, or with the TSR newsletter that comes out every couple weeks, and then simply using the data that is available. And a lot of people either don't realize it's available or don't know to look for it. But stuff like tax sale, the results, which has all the property data, what it sold for, when it redeemed, you can plug in a model and get an answer of what works, what doesn't, real quick. Having all of the data points, what has a mortgage, what may or may not have an HOA lien, what may or may not be a mobile home, all of that stuff is typically readily available, and at a minimum gives you that information to make an educated decision. Those three things, right? The having a plan, talking to an attorney, keeping plugged in with that attorney and news, and just having the data, right? Those three things can help you at least have eyes wide open or avoid almost all of the situations we've talked about in the last 3 episodes. And yeah, I guess, did I miss anything from your guys' perspective?
The only other thing that I would say, just to keep it on to, is I think we've talked a lot about original acquisition at the point of the tax lien or tax deed sale. A lot of what we're talking about also applies to acquisition of pool portfolios from other people that have, and I think you need to do the same thing. And so you need to do your due diligence before you agree. The data that you have available, Brian, the information we can provide. If you're interested in purchasing, some of these pooled assets from somebody else, especially if they're still liens, I think you need to reach out, contact somebody, have them go through so you know exactly, again, what you're getting before you purchase.
Exactly. Well, Randy, Matt, I immensely appreciate your guys' time again. I'm sure we'll do another series sometime soon. This has been extremely helpful and educational for myself. I'm sure for the listeners as well. Thank you again for your time.
Hey, thank you. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Brian.
All right, take care.